The terrifying train, the creepiest encounter ever. There are stories about haunted houses, ghostly forests, and cursed roads, but nothing compares to what happened on the old freight line in Colorado. This isn't just a ghost story, it's a warning. Because some trains don't just carry cargo, they carry something else. The abandoned tracks. It all started with Tyler, a 19-year-old college student visiting his cousin Jake in a small Colorado town. Jake loved urban exploring, and one night, he had an idea. "You ever heard of the old Fremont line?" Tyler shook his head. Jake grinned. "There's an abandoned train out there, just sitting on the tracks. People say it moves at night, even though the engine's dead." Tyler laughed. "What, like a ghost train?" "No, man," Jake said. "Worse. They say if you get too close, you don't come back the same." That night, they grabbed flashlights and headed to the Fremont freight yard. It was almost midnight when they found it. An old, rusted train. No lights, no sound, just sitting there like it had been waiting for years. Jake smirked. "Let's check it out." Tyler hesitated, but peer pressure won. They climbed onto the first car. The metal was cold, too cold for a summer night. That's when they saw it. Footprints, leading into the train, but the dust was undisturbed everywhere else. "Who the hell would be out here?" Tyler whispered. Jake shrugged. "Only one way to find out, the first warning." They moved deeper into the train. The air smelled like rust and something sour, like rotting fruit. Their flashlights flickered. Jake laughed nervously. "Cheap batteries." But Tyler wasn't laughing, because when his light passed one of the empty seats, he saw something. A handprint. Fresh, wet, like someone had just been sitting there. "Dude," Tyler hissed, "we should go." Jake was already moving toward the next car. "Come on, don't wuss out now." The passenger who never left. The next car was darker, colder. The windows were covered in grime, but faint streaks showed where something had pressed against the glass. Then, a whisper. Soft, indistinct, like someone calling from far away. "Did you hear that?" Tyler froze. Jake nodded, face pale. "Yeah, it came from the last car." They should have turned back, but they didn't. The last car was different, pristine, like it had been preserved while the rest of the train rotted. The seats were clean, the floor polished, and at the far end, a single passenger sat facing away from them. A man, wearing an old-fashioned suit and hat. Jake raised his flashlight. "Sir? You okay?" The figure didn't move. "Hey," Jake called, stepping closer. Tyler grabbed his arm. "Dude, stop. Something's wrong." And that's when the man turned his head. Slowly, too slowly, like something that didn't quite understand how human movement worked. His face was gray, sunken like a corpse left out too long. But the worst part? His eyes. Solid black, like the space between the stars. The escape that wasn't? Jake dropped the flashlight. They bolted back through the train, heartbeats pounding in their ears. The whispering grew louder, angrier. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening with every step. Finally, they stumbled out of the train and collapsed on the tracks, gasping for breath. The train was silent behind them. The lights from town flickered in the distance. "What the hell was that?" Tyler gasped. Jake didn't answer, because he was staring at the train. At the last car, the man was still there, watching. But now there was someone else standing beside him. A woman in a white dress, her face twisted in silent agony. Jake's flashlight was still lying inside the car, and on the floor beside it was Jake's backpack. The final warning. The next day they went back with the sheriff. But the train? Gone. No tracks, no footprints, just an empty clearing where the train had been. But there was one thing left. Jake's backpack. Inside, his phone was still recording. And the last video? It showed Jake walking into the last car, and a hand, pale and skeletal, reaching out from the shadows. To this day, no one knows what happened to that train. But the locals say, if you're near the Fremont line at night, you might still hear the whistle. And if you see a light on the tracks, don't get close, because once you step on that train, you don't come back the same. Or worse, you don't come back at all. That's tonight's story. If you ever find yourself near an abandoned train and you hear whispering, run, and don't look back. Like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen something you couldn't explain near the tracks? Until next time, sleep well. The unexplained train, you won't believe what happened. There are places the world forgets, places left behind by progress, and sometimes, those places refuse to be forgotten. This is the story of an abandoned train in Wyoming, a train that shouldn't have been there, a train that left one man questioning reality. It all starts with Ethan, a 32-year-old delivery driver working long hours on empty highways. He'd driven the same stretch of road dozens of times, Route 14 cutting through endless plains, nothing but grass, sky, and the occasional ghost town. But one night, after dropping off a late delivery, Ethan decided to take a shortcut, a dirt road that didn't show up on his GPS, and that's when he saw it. The train that shouldn't exist. Ethan rounded a curve, headlights cutting through the dark, and there, a train. Sitting right across the road, old, rusted, like it had been there for decades. But here's the thing, there were no train tracks, just the train, silent, motionless, like it had been dropped from the sky. Curiosity turned to fear. Ethan stopped the truck, engine idling. "Where the hell did this come from?" he muttered. There was no crossing sign, no rails, nothing, just dry dirt and this impossible train stretching across the entire road. He pulled out his phone. No service, but the clock? 3:07 a.m. Ethan, nothing. He stepped out, flashlight in hand, and that's when he saw the door, slightly open like someone was waiting for him to step inside. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him, get back in the truck, turn around, go. But he didn't. He stepped closer. The flashlight beam flickered. And then, a voice, soft, whispering, "Help me." Ethan froze. The sound was coming from inside the train. Inside the nightmare. Ethan climbed the rusted steps and peered inside. The train was empty, rotting seats, broken windows, but the air, freezing. He called out, "Hello? Someone there?" Silence. Then footsteps. From the next car, slow, deliberate. Ethan's breath hitched. He swung the flashlight toward the sound and caught a glimpse of bare feet. Dirty, pale, dragging, moving away. Trapped in time. Heart racing, Ethan turned back to the door, but it was gone. The entrance, the road, everything outside was black, like the world had disappeared. His phone buzzed. One new notification, a text message from an unknown number. It read, "Get off the train, now." Panicking, Ethan ran down the narrow aisle, passing rows of empty seats. But as he reached the next car, he stopped cold. There was someone sitting there. A woman, back turned, hair long and tangled, wearing clothes from another era, like something out of the 1930s. Ethan swallowed hard. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't move. He took a step closer, and that's when her head snapped around. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth opened too wide, and in a voice that sounded like static, she whispered, "Too late. Escape." Ethan bolted. Down one car, then another. The train shifted, metal groaning, as if the whole thing were coming to life. His flashlight died, pitch black. The footsteps behind him, faster, louder, closer. And then he tripped, hit the ground hard. His phone flew from his hand, screen cracking. For a moment, everything was silent, except for one thing. Breathing, right next to his ear. The final warning. Ethan grabbed the phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam flickered, and there she was, the woman, crawling, closer, closer. He scrambled backward and his foot hit something. Metal. The door, wide open now. Without thinking, he lunged through it, falling onto the dirt road outside. The moment he hit the ground, the train horn blared. Deafening, blinding light flooded the area, and then silence. The train was gone. The aftermath. Ethan sat there, shaking, heart pounding in his chest. His phone buzzed again. Another message. "You got lucky, don't come back." He never told the cops, who would believe him. But here's the thing, when Ethan checked his phone later, the video he had taken of the train, it was still there. But the timestamp was wrong. It didn't say 3, it said 1936. Final warning, no one knows what Ethan stumbled onto that night. A ghost train? A time loop? Or something worse? But locals say if you ever drive Route 14 and you see a train where there shouldn't be one, don't stop. Don't look. And whatever you do, don't get on. Because once you do, you might not make it back. That's tonight's story. What do you think Ethan saw that night? A glitch in reality? A haunting from the past? Or something we can't even begin to explain? Let me know in the comments. And if you ever see an abandoned train in the middle of the road, keep driving. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more terrifying tales. Until next time, sleep well. The chilling train, a nightmare come to life. There are places where the past lingers, places where time twists, and some places refuse to let you leave. This is the story of a train that shouldn't exist, a midnight ride that never ends, and the man who barely escaped with his life. The Midnight Ride. Nate was a trucker. Long hours, empty highways. He'd seen his fair share of weird things, but nothing like this. It was 2:13 a.m., and he was driving through northern Colorado, a remote stretch of road with nothing but fields and sky. Then his radio crackled. A voice. "Clear the tracks, train approaching." Nate blinked. Tracks? There hadn't been rails on that road for decades. But as he rounded the next curve, there it was, a train. Old, rusted, moving. But the strangest part, it was floating. The impossible train. Nate slammed on the brakes. The train rumbled across the road, passing right in front of his headlights. But there were no tracks, just dirt and gravel, and the train hovering inches above the ground. The cars were ancient, like something out of the 1920s. Windows shattered, paint peeling, and inside, faces. Pale, expressionless, staring straight ahead. None of them blinked. Nate's breath caught. He grabbed his phone, started filming, but the moment he hit record, the train stopped. The door opens. One of the cars hissed open. Steam poured out, and standing in the doorway, a conductor, dressed in an old uniform, cap tilted low. His face was wrong, blurry, like a photo out of focus. He raised one hand and beckoned. Nate's phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "Next stop, you." Curiosity turned to terror. Nate did what any sane person would do. He threw the truck in reverse, but the engine sputtered, died, headlights flickered. The train hummed with energy, like it was alive. And the passengers? They all turned in perfect unison, staring at Nate, smiling. Nowhere to run. Nate bolted, jumped from the cab, ran into the field beside the road, but the train, it followed him. Not moving along tracks. Sliding through the grass, silent and smooth. The conductor stepped down. Boots never touched the ground. He floated, closing the gap fast. "Last call," the man rasped, voice like grinding metal. Nate tripped, fell hard. The train loomed over him, and then the whistle screamed. The final choice. Nate covered his ears, heart pounding. The train flickered like an old film reel skipping frames. The conductor stood over him, holding something out. "A ticket. Take it or stay here forever." Nate froze. He didn't want to know what forever meant. He slapped the ticket from the conductor's hand and ran for his life. Back to reality or not. Nate didn't stop until he reached the truck. The engine roared to life, like it had never died. He sped away, tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror, the train was gone. Nothing but dark highway stretching behind him. But the nightmare wasn't over, because when he got home, he checked his phone. The video he'd taken, it was still there. But the timestamp, it read 3:07 a.m., 1923. Nate never drove that route again. But he told me this: if you ever see a train with no tracks, don't stop, don't stare, and whatever you do, don't get on. Because some trains never reach their final destination. They just keep collecting passengers. And if you board, you might never get off. That's tonight's story. What do you think Nate saw that night? A ghost train? A time slip? Or something even darker? Let me know in the comments. And if you're ever driving down an empty highway and hear a train whistle where no tracks should be, keep driving. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more chilling tales. Until next time, sleep well.